Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to some of you. It's with great pleasure that we are going to start this webinar. And I'd like to start by thanking our speakers for accepting our invitation to be here today to start this important reflection. And I'd also like to thank all the participants. I'd like to thank our interpreters who always make our communication possible, enable us to speak in various languages. Even though not all of us will be speaking our native languages, like our sister from Lebanon, and Ainoa is also going to be speaking Castilian. So thank you for being flexible in that sense as well. So we are ready now to start this webinar that has been organized within an agenda of various different webinars that the World March is organizing. And it's also part of our process for preparing our next international meeting that is going to take place in October in Ankara, in Turkey, and where we will be celebrating 25 years of the World March. And we will be preparing our next international action for 2025. So, in that context, we will be discussing various crises, the living crisis, the economic crisis, food sovereignty, and the care crisis, and how we are building grassroots feminist resistance from our movements. So in today's seminar, we're going to be talking about care, and we are going to try to understand the different intersections of capitalism, patriarchy, heteropatriarchy, and all that in the sense of care. And from our perspective of the feminist economy, we will discuss the alternatives that we are pushing forward in order to organize care and the care economy to put sustainability in the center. And that is why I have the great pleasure to welcome 4 great activists here with us today who are going to share their experience and knowledge with us. So we have Veronica Gago from Argentina. Welcome, Veronica. She is a professor from the Social Sciences faculty in the University of Buenos Aires, the National University of San Martin, and she's also on the Board of Sciences and Technical Sciences. She has a long history of feminist activism work. She's written many articles, and she's also played an important part in building the movement, not one less, ni una menos. And so she is going to be talking to us about care, social reproduction, and debt. Then we have Lina Abu Habib from Lebanon. She is the director of the Asfari Institute for Civil Society, and she is a professor at the university. She also has a long history both in academia and in activism, and she regularly writes about care work, citizenship, the feminist recuperation, feminist movements in the region, in the Middle East and North Africa as well. And Lina is going to be talking to us about care in feminist activism in the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa region. Then we will hear from Ainoa Lassa Sopela from the Basque Country. She is a member of the coordinating movement of the Euskaleria feminist movement, and she's also part of the World March group there. And together with Ainoa, we will also hear from Naya, who is also from the coordinating group of the feminist group. There are several different microphones that are on. Can we turn them off? Is that okay? Okay. So I know I'm going to try and pronounce this properly. But I know we'll talk about care work as a way of revolutionizing. So each speaker will have 15-20 minutes, and then we will open the floor for a round of debate, and then we will open the floor for questions. Ainoa and Naya have timetable difficulties, so we'll have to keep an eye on, they'll have to leave early and we'll have to keep an eye on the time. But first of all, we'll start with Veronica Gago. Thank you very much, Nalu, Pinar, and to everyone who have played a part in organizing this seminar. I'm very pleased to be part of this collective reflection process, and especially because this seminar is part of a whole series of political initiatives, part of a saga, a sequence of other initiatives to organize and for feminist organizations. So I'm very happy to be a part of this. So I prepared 5 points to try and structure what I'm going to say, and to try and propose 5 or several different pillars of discussion. I have a kind of notes about different points. They're quite specific, which I think present the reflections that we've had in different collectives and in various different research studies, and points that I've been working on in particular. The first point I wanted to discuss is related to how we've been discussing this within the pandemic. That is about how the pandemic was a closed 2-year period, which we are slowly recovering from. We're slowly recovering from this moment of exception. But I think we could say we're still find ourselves within the dynamic that was established during the pandemic. And so I think it's important to think about what kind of political organization was formed during the pandemic. And I think all of the different considerations that we have been sharing in different spaces are very important. Considerations such as how we incorporate the reproductive and care work, and how this has been the basic infrastructure that has helped us to get through the pandemic. So I hope that this will help us to reflect on the one hand about the importance of the debates and the construction of feminist networks that we have been building and that made themselves available during the pandemic. So there's a great deal of work that has been done, a great deal of things that have been built, a great deal of knowledge that has been shared. And that was thanks to women who were super available, but also super exploited during the pandemic. This is important, I think, because it underscores the role of the different practices, the different languages that have helped to expand the feminist movement, and which on the one hand were kind of absorbed and made available and super exploited by the pandemic. So I think this is an important point. And there's something about the pandemic that I think is important to highlight, and that is the duration of our working days, how our working days, our virtual working days, have overlapped with our in-person or physical working days. So that's to say, there hasn't been an end to the pandemic because we continue to work virtually and do physical in-person tasks. So a classic example of this and of the classic socialist tradition is that after the end of the working day, we're seeing that not only are our working days longer, but our work has been made more intense because of this duality of virtual and physical work. So I think there's an important point about how we manage the intensification of the working day with this duality of virtual and physical work, which has installed itself and to stay, it seems. And then the crisis that we're seeing today has to do with the crisis of time, effectively, and the tiredness of our bodies in general. I think that this feeling that we share, of course, differently, depending on our individual realities, but there is a common element, and it's a fundamental point to discuss, and that's about political organization, because the lack of resources, the lack of time is the main difficulty that's stopping us from carrying out political activities. We are increasingly having more difficulties in finding time to hold an assembly, do an activity, and we reach these spaces more tired, more exhausted when it comes to doing all these events. So we're experiencing a kind of disinvestment because of this exhaustion and tiredness, not because of a bad faith, but because our working days have extended and we have had a lack of resources to sustain ourselves. So that is why we're seeing a crisis when it comes to activism, because we're expending so much energy elsewhere in the working day. The second point that is related to that is how after the pandemic, because of the prolongation of the war and the intensification of natural disasters, the crisis situation has intensified. And this idea enables us to think about how the crisis of social reproduction that we saw during the pandemic is being prolonged because of the war, and that we're seeing that precisely through inflation. So Argentina, for example, is a very particular case. We have 100% inflation in our economy, but inflation is a global phenomenon. So we can say that inflation is an effect of this war that is being felt in everyone's daily lives. So I think that there's an image that can represent this, and that's the war on social reproduction. So one of the characteristics of neoliberalism is to make war into this intensification. So we're seeing how inflation is an effect of the war, but it's been a result of neoliberalism that has been perpetuated over years and years. And something that has been seen in feminist debates is to relocate this war, not only to talk about the armed conflict that has been taking place between Ukraine and Russia, but to extend that to other forms of war and to map out the war of social reproduction. And this idea enables us to update the forms of violence that neoliberalism is taking.
Concretas que creo que también son transversales a muchas de nuestras realidades.
And now to move on to our next issue, we can resituate this war in food and land, housing, and debt. We have at least 3 main axes that we've been researching.
La reproducción social implica
on social reproduction entails making food, housing, and the economy more vulnerable, more precarious, making it harder for people to pay for their everyday needs. So food, housing, and debt or indebtedness as a triad of problems that show us which terrains are systematically being made precarious. Now we can't take for granted that we'll be able to feed ourselves, that we'll be able to house ourselves, or that we'll have an income. We have to get into debt to make sure that we have an income, and part of that debt goes to paying for our basic needs, basic social reproduction. So in political terms, I think that it has been very interesting in recent years how the feminist struggle has also been a struggle for housing, for land, for food, and for a lack of debt, for freedom from debt. We can show on the map how feminist alliances and how these struggles show a feminist perspective and show us how these conflicts manifest themselves. In this regard, I think it's very interesting how the term social reproduction has become more popular. It shouldn't just be a technical or theoretical or an academic term, but when we talk about social reproduction and reproduction of life, we need to make it concrete by using these very everyday images of a lack of income and the being forced into debt, the difficulty of obtaining housing and what that means, what it means for the rental market to take part of our income, and inflation on food. I think those are very concrete images for us to think about this war on social reproduction, and also for us to map and to visualize the feminist struggle on these issues. In this regard, in a recent conversation, Silvia Federici suggested a term, fascist disassociation of the economy. So for us to think about this war on social reproduction, she proposed the term fascisticization of the economy. So we need to see how this insecurity and vulnerability, precarity in everyday life to guarantee our basic needs, how this is the outcome of this fascisticization of society, how this precarity is being as a result of reactionary activity. And I think this is very important. It also explains many of the dynamics in feminist movements and migrant movements, and this response to widespread precarity. So I think this can be a very useful concept for our analyses and for our struggles. And the last thing I want to say has to do with the question of new external debt. For example, in the case of Argentina, the International Monetary Fund, at a time of widespread global crisis, is insisting on this indebtedness. In Argentina, for example, we have what's essentially a co-government. The International Monetary Fund has taken a very colonial approach, and they check Argentina's accounts every 3 months, and they determine what can and can't be done in terms of public policy. And the latest observation that they made
un conjunto de más de 200 organizaciones
And
políticas
more than 200 political and trade union organizations raised the point that the moratorium on pensions, on housewives, so this war on a basic human right, which has been won, which is a provisional moratorium for those who have spent all their lives on care work. That's a direct objective. That's against the perspective of the International Monetary Fund. So I think here we can see how the multilateral lending organization, how that directly affects the care economy in our everyday lives. And I think that today we're able to do these analyses because there has been a lot of research and study and activism in the feminist movement to connect these different spheres: external indebtedness, how this external debt leads to a reduction of public policies, and the way in which that affects, in this case, women who have not been able to pay into the system because they haven't had salaried work and who have dedicated their lives to care work. So I wanted to raise those points so that we can continue the conversation later on. Thank you very much. Thank you, Veronica. That was very interesting. We'd love to carry on listening to you. I wanted to say something that some of you are doing, as we haven't all been able to introduce ourselves. You can put your names and where you're from in the chat, because then our presence here will be recorded and we can have a little look after the webinar to see who's been listening to us. So now we'll move on to Lina Abu Habibi, who will be talking about care in feminist activism in the MENA region. Thank you, Lina.
Thank you, Nalu, and I'm very, very happy to be here. And thank you to Jana for inviting me. And you know, when first I had a conversation with Jana about, you know, within which framework is this conversation being organized, and she referred back to the Women's March. I basically shared with her that, you know, you talked a little bit about the history, and I remember almost 25 years ago, the first network of Arab feminist activists and women's rights activists basically forming a network for the International Women's March. And I'm very happy to see the network coming back, but also coming back in force. And this actually, so this threw me back a little bit, and that's why I wanted to place the activism around care in the MENA region as part of the history, if you want, of activism around the issue of care, trying to see a little bit when it was started and why is it so recent. And I was trying to look through notes and, you know, going through history lane a little bit, and I have a couple of things that I wanted to share with you. In Lebanon, there was one of the pioneers, if you want, a reformist, I would call, a lawyer reformist, who truly spent her life trying to reform a letter of the law from here or there. I mean, basically taking the ancient strategy of baby steps in reform, which we know now, looking back and with the benefit of hindsight, we know very well that this doesn't, you know, take us far. But back in the day, I think she was behind the 4 or 5 or 6 reforms in very specific letters of the law. And when she passed away, somebody wrote her biography. One of her friends wrote her biography, and she talked about her and how amazing she was and what a trailblazer. And then she adds, even though she was busy and she was meeting with parliamentarians and she was so consumed by her work for reforms for women's rights, her work at home was never affected. Her the meals that she offered in her home were particularly impeccable. Her table was an amazing table. She was the perfect host, even though she did this, which is basically how I would describe, where the thinking around care was placed back in the day. And I'm talking about the 60s and the 70s. And anecdotally, although, again, with the benefit of hindsight, thinking about it now, it's very clear that care should have been at the center of any demands. And remember, we're talking about women's rights activism back in the day. All the demands were made with the justification that they will not change the status quo in terms of who does what in care work. And women's rights activists back in the day were very, very careful in their narratives not to touch that status quo. And actually to justify that if women would work, it doesn't mean that food will not be at the table. If women would work, it doesn't mean that the children will do less well in schools and so on. We even had studies which actually talked about compared school performance, academic performance between the children of women who didn't work, and by work I mean employment outside the home, and the children of women who were actually quote unquote housewives. So actually not only was care invisible in the narrative of women's rights movements at back in the day, it was actually, there was specific intent to make sure that no matter what reforms we were calling for, that particular aspect, the private domain, will never change. It had to be reassuring. Men had to be reassured that their clothes will be washed, that there will be a good warm meal on the table. So I think that was the main problematic that we started with, for as far as we can see, writings and testimonials, etc. A very specific argumentation delinking care from any kind of transformation. Okay, and that I think is where the problem really started, because this was linked with the fact that the whole quintessential family, the sacrosanct family, the concept of the family was not going to change, including, the fact that reforms are not going to lead to, and I'm using reform in a very, I mean to use reform rather than change or transformation, etc. They will not lead to high level of divorce. They will not lead to children being on the street. They will not lead to all sorts of decadence because of this. And the right to work was actually promoted as something that happens, that needs to happen because it's good for the family and it's good for the community. And, flyers that promoted this back in the day, I mean, it would be like looking at flyers from the Bath Party or from the Soviet Union, women incredibly happy at work and coming back incredibly emancipated at home and cooking the best meals, and everybody in the family is clean, well-fed, happy, and healthy. And I think I wanted to stop here. I mean, I want to take a deep dive here to see, okay, so what is, what justifies this? How can we explain this when we know that the demands made by women's rights activists during the day related, for instance, to improvement in the labor laws? What does improvement in the labor law mean? It means access to jobs. It means promotion in the workplace. It was never back in the day about safety in the workplace, about safety from harassment, about safety from sexual misconduct, etc. It was basically about access. It was about access to education. It was about access to political life, not as political actors and decision makers, but as voters, as, perhaps candidates, but particular kinds of candidates, not candidates with a feminist agenda. And also about reforms in the personal status laws. And for those of you who are not familiar with the MENA region, all women and girls of course, we're talking about a system that is, I would say, intellectually lazy because it insists on the binary. It's easy to say there are, the laws are only about two categories of people. So reforms of in family laws were basically about making divorce a little bit less cruel, about making child custody a little bit more humane. We do not touch inheritance because this is actually linked to finances, and this is actually linked to money passing hands. So it's actually a very tangible division of resources that nobody wants to touch. So all of these demands, which were at the center of movements back in the day, actually not only ignored the issue of care as central to transformation and as central to changing power relation and social relation, but actually were made on the assumption that care is untouchable. We are not questioning care. We're not questioning who does what. We're not questioning these responsibilities. These will never change. Okay, so we were then truly far away from the recognition of care as work. We were in a context where it was natural. It was something that was genetically natural to this homogeneous category called women, and they had to do it because it's an obligation, and it's also linked to all sorts of emotions and love and all these myths that were woven around care. But what was the problem with the political decision not to challenge this? And to think about this, we have to understand a little bit also the overall ecosystem of social movements, which actually persists until now. Social movements in the MENA region, I mean, by and large, in general, if we want to talk about trade unions, or if we want to talk about the environment movement or the human rights movements or other movements, they're by and large incredibly patriarchal. And for women's rights activists to find allies, these allies that wanted change were actually allies that didn't want any change in the status quo in relation of who does what at the household. That's number one. Number two, this actually, led to the fact that there was no desire to fight with your allies, quote unquote allies. There was no desire to get into a battle where actually you're going to be completely isolated. So the whole movement solidarity, I would say, was non-existent, but particularly because we tend to forget that by and large, most of our movements, even liberation movements, whatever you want to call it, by and large, male-oriented, by and large, fraught with patriarchal practices, by and large, violent vis-a-vis women and girls. Okay, so, and actually, when you think about this, and when you think about this kind of history, comes the new millennium, and like one decade into the new millennium, it's really not surprising. And I'm going to tell you, I'm really sorry to be using the World Bank as a reference, but it's really not surprising for the World Bank to frame something, calling it the MENA paradox. And it hurts me to say that it's a right framing, because the MENA paradox referred to the fact that on the one hand, Arab regimes have made headways in what they call bridging the gender gap in education, which is basically access of women and girls in higher education and in school education. And it had made some headways in basically access to healthcare. But these advances And in some cases, you were talking about baselines that were zero, you know, like total illiteracy, etc. These advances did not translate into advances in serious economic power, economic participation, and political power and political participation. Because, of course, there was never a clear narrative or a clear desire or a clear understanding, okay, of a fight for the recognition of care as being at the heart of transforming societies and transforming relations. And I want to move to, I mean, towards that period in time. And I have to credit, I really want to credit our sisters, our feminist sisters in North Africa, and particularly in Morocco, where, you know, the discussion around care framed as an obstacle towards development and an obstacle towards, you know, agency and an obstacle toward attaining economic rights started to materialize. And some tools were generated. And a couple of tools were, of course, again, truly mainstream tools, but I have to stop and talk about their meaning because they were a turning point. So first of all, you know, looking at time budget and for our sisters and I think Morocco now is into its third national time budget survey. The idea is, let's measure, you know, economists would like metrics. Let's measure who's doing what, for how long, and what are the opportunity costs, who benefits and who gains. And I have to say the measurements that were extracted from time budget use surveys basically were used partly as one aspect of the argument to reform personal status laws in Morocco. How did it translate? Okay, in a situation of divorce in personal status laws in Morocco, whatever women put in the household in terms of labor, basically care work, was counted zero. So basically, whatever contribution was the contribution made in money. And this contribution often came from men. And what was really, again, this is not a reform in the personal status law that is radical, but it's incredibly important. And it was a very important wedge because not all of a sudden, because, you know, the judges started calculating women's care work to calculate how much compensation they get. And it had equal value as, you know, employment, a formal employment for the husband. Not only this, women's contribution to the maintenance of the household meant that the practice of repudiation and kicking them out of the house became legally unacceptable and legally, I would say, impossible. Of course, in our countries, you can get, you can circumvent the law in so many ways. But this recognition of care being work that has value, that can be given a number, a particular number that is equal to work outside the house, was basically a main breakthrough. And also, you know, the many studies from Morocco in the past used to note to the fact that homelessness amongst older women, divorced older women, was essentially due to divorce and repudiation because they were legally kicked out. It was legal to kick them out. And now the law says, no, you can't do this because the work is recognized and it's valued and there's the dollar sign or whatever the currency is. That's number one. The second breakthrough, again, coming from that particular era, was questioning the way national statistics are done, at least in our region. And one of the most interesting anecdotes is that, you know, it's not normal to have a category that is only feminine. again, we're not there yet in terms of moving away from the illusionary binary. And that category is housewife. There is no house husband. And that category is a category on its own, which basically does not have its equivalent for the other group, and also means does not work. So with that whole process, that whole mindset and ideology of let's count who's doing what is the effort, what is the level of effort, and what is the opportunity cost, came also the subsequent practice of saying, you know, all our statistics are wrong because the ways in which we are valuing this work, there's a lot of work that is absent, and therefore all our national statistics are wrong. And of course, we tend to come late in these conversations, but think about this happening with the beginning of the new millennium. These were really transformative conversations, which were never really talked about before. And I think, you know, we're talking at this stage about a shift in the ecosystem of feminist movements. We're talking about the emergence of younger intersectional groups. We're talking about the emergence of the conversation of bodily rights and agency and sexual rights. And we started talking with the younger generation, we started talking more and more about the body itself and about, you know, the labor of the body and your agency over your body and in terms of your work. So if you look, for instance, at if you try to find literature. And by literature, I include here gray literature, published literature by feminists from the region, literature by northern feminists. If you look at try to find literature on care, social reproduction, movements around these two, we are going to find this in the last 20 years. Okay, where are we now? If we also do a quick, like, helicopter view of the existing, emerging, interesting intersectional movements right now, the problem is we still are not going to find care as a main headline, a main slogan, as a demand, as a main demand for recognition, for policies related to care, etc. But I think what has changed now is the fact that the demands that have yet to be, or the changes or the shifts that have not been made yet or have not been made fully, they're framed differently. So for instance, when we're talking about, and again, this may be a particularity of the region, the whole issue of personal status laws, because these are the laws that actually hold women and girls hostages from their birth until their death. And it's almost it's not impossible, but there's a high cost of stepping out of the system. This is beyond the conversation. This is beyond the conversation right now. But we have to understand that what has changed now, and changed significantly, is the way these demands for reforms are framed. So the demand for reform of divorce laws, since the reform of Morocco, I can say, at least according to my own observation, is now formulated differently. It's now reformulated with an argument that looks at women's contribution to care. The demands for the reforms of labor laws, for instance, which remain incredibly discriminatory in our countries, are now also centering around care. So we may not be there yet in terms of care as a unifying demand, care as an issue that, you know, that is at the same time fundamental, but also as as a forward-looking strategy for change. But I can see that the ways in which the feminist movement is formulating a number of its struggles and the highlights of its struggles and the narrative, it has shifted considerably. And I want to end by saying that I think this is just the beginning of a conversation on care in the region. I totally agree with Veronica. The pandemic has actually unveiled all sorts of things, and particularly in terms of the importance of care within our societies, etc. Has this translated into social policies that are based on a recognition and centering of care? Not yet, I don't think so. Has this pushed us to look at one of the major crises of care in our region, essentially in relation to migrant women, domestic workers? Also, this is a starting, ongoing, very powerful struggle, but we are not there yet, even in terms of framing it within this conversation. So I would say it's an uphill battle, but it's an ongoing battle. Thank you so much. I hope I didn't take more time than was allowed to me.
Gracias, muy interesante.
Thank you. That was very interesting to find out more about the MENA region and the situation there on this issue. And you're right. For us, it's also the start of a discussion. And it's very important to hear voices from the different regions so that we can approach this issue of care from a different perspective and the way we organize ourselves as a feminist movement, but taking into account our diversity. Now we're going to move on to Ainhoa. Ainhoa is going to divide her time with Naya, so they'll organize their own time, and they're going to link care. They're going to talk about the struggle in Euskal Herria, the Basque Country, towards a collective right to care. Thank you very much. Thank you. Naya has logged on with me, but I'll take responsibility for talking now, and if she needs help, if I need help, then I'll ask her for a hand. Thank you for inviting us to this session. It's been very interesting to hear our sisters who've spoken before. And we wanted to say from the feminist movement in the Basque Country, our interpretation, our analysis is quite close to Veronica's. Our analysis is quite similar, although it's more situated in the Basque Country, but the crisis of care is also happening here. In the Basque Country is divided into two parts. It's split between Spain and France, but institutionally speaking, the power and the jurisdiction, in terms of power and jurisdiction, is divided into three different provinces. When it comes to care work, the situation is very complex. Most of this work takes place privately in residential care homes for elderly people, and this work is highly feminized and very precarious. The immigration law in Spain means that many people are living in the country irregularly, and that means that these women, mostly women who have migrated, end up working in care work and very often without a legal resident status. Their work is often invisibilized, and it's often very difficult to obtain data on the situation. We also have the figure of the live-in domestic worker, which is a bit like it's one dimension of modern day slavery. And we could talk about a lot of other different factors. For example, by privatizing public services, care work has been transferred to the family. If people aren't able to pay for these social services, so this work falls to families and usually to women. I won't go into an analysis of the situation in too much depth because Veronica did a really good job and I'm not going to do a better job. I just wanted to talk about the process of how it's been implemented here. The feminist movement for many years has been talking about life, about reconstructing or rebuilding lives that are worth living. And I'd say in 2018 and 2019, there were a couple of turning points. We organized feminist strikes on the 8th of March. These strikes involved a lot of women and trade unions, as well as social movements. And they led to alliances. And we were able to create structures across the Basque Country. It's not very easy to create these structures across the whole country. And after these two turning points, we held a series of feminist conferences across the Basque Country, which we hold every 10 years. And there were a couple of key issues that arose that we talked about, and we had workshops and speakers from feminist movements across the Basque Country. There were more than 3,000 women there. And we found them very productive. One of the conclusions we reached was that we need a shared feminist agenda so that we can discuss and fight for a system, a society that puts life at the center. And now, as we know, we've all experienced the pandemic, which began in 2020. And that gave rise to a platform organized by a series of collectives and trade unions to take an active role in this crisis. They tried to contact institutions in the Basque Country, but we didn't get a response as we expected. But we built some momentum towards the creation or the idea of creating a public system, a public community system of care. Since then, our intention has been to establish how this public community system of care would look like. To do that, we've had a lot of meetings online. Naya will remember that particularly well. Last year, we held another series of meetings or another conference. We weren't able to have a lot of participants because of the situation, but we had more than 100 women from different villages and towns across the Basque Country to talk about this system. On the one hand, we talked about what it means for us to put life at the center, how we imagine this public community system of care, and also in the long term, what our urgent needs are at the moment. And as well as discussing the content, we also wanted to talk about and analyze what actions we needed to take to progress in our struggle. We've held a lot of assemblies because for us it's very important for people from different towns and villages to organize as part of this process. And it's been a grassroots process. We've encouraged people to talk at the grassroots level. And we decided at the start of this academic year that we wanted to create a social agreement in the Basque Country to challenge the public institutions, to call on for action from the public institutions and from society, from mixed social movements, from men. We decided that we wanted to use a general feminist.
Entonces hemos dado muchos pasos, hemos hecho público.
So since then, we've taken several steps. We have published our call on the 8th of March. We took advantage of the day to call for a general feminist strike for autumn and winter this year. And we've been talking to various social movements and trade unions to start creating among all of us this social agreement. As has been said, and Veronica, you said this, we are building and we have created the idea of the need for a collective right to care. And we've been talking about this a lot. And during our struggles, we have been speaking a great deal about the material needs for this. We've spoken about housing, the amount of time we invest in work. We've spoken and we speak about discrimination, about public spaces. We've spoken about, what is it again? Yes, that's it. We've talked about education, about health, about many different things, because we think that talking about care, it means talking about life, essentially. And care throughout life is evident, even though you may see it in different forms, in different moments. So we have published the fact that we are going to do a strike. As we've made it public, there's no going back on our word now. It's going ahead. And we have plans for a National Assembly in April. And in that assembly, we will start to define what our red lines are in terms of the definition, because we have underscored the fact that this general strike is going to be a feminist general strike. And we want to stand out from other references we have of strikes. So we are also calling for men to get involved in this strike and this agreement, because otherwise it seems like it's just a struggle for women, but we want everyone involved. And that is why we want to set out our red lines within the movement about what it means to organize a feminist strike, and also what our red lines will be when it comes to content. We have drawn up a few reflections, and in what are they, Naya? Ah, yes, and our demands, our claims.
Acordadas, vale, ya tenemos bastante acordadas.
Yes, and we have organized and agreed what our organization is going to look like. And what we're going to need from the other social movements and trade unions is to see what our minimums are, because what our intention is to arrive at our strike with certain concrete demands, because we think that the hardest work will be to reach every village, every sister in all of the villages in the Basque Country with our reflections about this strike, and also to specify our demands and make them very clear, because we want our demands to be able to be fulfilled, and we want them to be able to be used by everybody. So we want them to fit in and be reflected in the towns, in the neighborhoods, in the villages, at all different levels. So at the moment, perspectives on what domestic and care work are very divided here. So we have a great deal of work ahead of us, but we have seen a great deal of motivation, a great deal of energy, because we think this is a struggle for sovereignty in many senses, and we are very motivated because of this. I don't know if you'd like to add anything, Naya?
Pues igual, no sé, igual no he utilizado mucho tiempo de...
Well, I don't think I've used that much time, but I think that we'll end here then for now. You don't want to add anything? Well, okay, just a little bit of what Ainhoa said is our line of thought was quite similar to what Veronica was saying. The idea that feminism is not just beliefs based on women, rather it's the fight for a change of paradigm, the building of a new feminist society. So, as Ainhoa said, the idea is to struggle towards that. So that's why we're calling for a general feminist strike to recognize the important role of care work, but we also want to put at the center of everything the fact that this is not only an ideology, but it's also a matter of changing the economy, about changing macro politics, about changing everything. And that's why we want to really place the lives of everybody at the forefront. Thank you very much, Naya. Okay, then now we're going to open up for everybody to participate. I think it's very important now to hear from everyone's different perspectives and realities, but the floor is also open for questions, to reflect on certain points made by our panelists and our speakers. So the only problem we're going to have is that Ainhoa has to leave at 8:30 for her, but I'm just going to open the floor for a few minutes for everyone to say something if they want. Who would like to begin?
Sophie?
Sophie, introduce yourself and go ahead.
Okay, thank you, dear sisters. Hello, Nalu and all sisters. I'm Sophie Ngalapi. I'm from Tanzania, East African. I'm also international committee member. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you very much for the good presentation from all three sisters. It was really touchful and very, very, very good information. So I wanted to contribute about the care work really, it is the same here in Africa, also East Africa. Care work for women are not recognized at all, are not valued at all by community up to the family level. Women are doing everything, and it comes the end that they are not working. If they ask, are you working? They said, no, I'm not working. While she is doing a lot when she stays at home, like a lot of work, fetching water, caring the baby, caring the elders, and all these things. But also, I want to add that apart from this unvalued care work, but women also, they are suffering from gender-based violence and domestic violence. For example, here in Zanzibar, where I'm living now, care work of women are not valued, but it go beyond. Even if she is contribute a lot, funds, money, resources on the development of family level, but when she divorced, she is not even get anything except if she have a receipt of what she is contributing during her marriage life. So it is really touchful. Another things I want to finish my contribution, to give another chance to my fellows. I wanted to say that let's continue to empower those grassroots women who are not know even their rights, because the majority of women who are in the village, in the very grassroots, they don't know nothing. So let create or try to think to have a good strategy on how to reach those women who are voiceless. Thank you, Nalu, and thank you, sisters. That's why I want to say this. Let me give another chance to my colleagues to contribute. Thank you.
Gracias a vos. Ahora,
Thank you.
pasamos a Sophie.
Now I'll give the floor to Sophie.
Sophie Oguto, pequeña.
Sophie Oguto, my dear.
¿Nos escucha, Sophie?
Can you hear us, Sophie?
Bueno, no sé si alguien quiere seguir mientras.
Well, I don't know if anyone else wants to say something while we wait for Sophie. Saletti?
Olá, me
Hello,
escutam?
can you hear me?
Alô?
Hello?
Sim, te escutamos, Salete.
Yes, we can hear you, Saletti. You can hear me?
Escuta?
Sim, sim.
Desculpa.
Yes.
Então, primeiramente, né, queria parabenizar,
So
né, pela iniciativa.
first of all, I'd like to congratulate you on this initiative.
É uma discussão muito importante, porque ela
I think this topic is very important
tem 61 anos e minha mãe tem
because, apologies from the interpreter, she's speaking Portuguese and the interpreter does not speak Portuguese.
do cuidado, seja de baixa renda, seja pessoas com classe média, sempre a gente tem e sempre surge essa questão, tipo, nós somos sempre as cuidadoras, né, da infância.
I think there's an internet connection problem as well.
Salete, te perdimos.
E essa responsabilidade
Salete, we lost you.
nos acarretando, inclusive, problemas de
Salete,
né?
Salete, está mal sua conexão? Tenta
Salete,
terminar.
your connection isn't very good.
Já.
It's because someone was calling me.
Então, é só para concluir, eu ressalto a importância desse debate, porque com as creches, com a infância, até que a gente já avançou. Mas, por exemplo, a questão do cuidado das pessoas idosas e enfermos, ainda precisamos melhorar muito, porque essa acaba sempre caindo sobre as mulheres, né, da família, principalmente.
The fact is that the burden always falls on the shoulders of women. We all know that. That's it. Thank you.
Também dijo que com a infância se ha avançado.
Salete also said that the topic of nurseries has advanced a little bit, but when it comes to age and the older age, there hasn't been any progress there when it comes to women working at home. Now, Sophie, are you back now? Have you solved your microphone problem?
Yes, I'm sorry. My microphone wasn't so good. I hope you can all hear me now. But I'll have to switch off my video so it doesn't interfere with my network. Yeah, so I really want to appreciate all the speakers. What has been shared is absolutely enriching. And I want to say that as grassroots feminists, it's also very important to look at the root causes. Particularly in Africa, we know that care work, just like my sister Sophie has mentioned, is not valued at all. And it all starts from the culture, because when a woman is married, then apparently she's sold off. It means that she's been sold off, because then she's exchanged with cows or cattle. And that means that she has been bought. So that brings in a new phase of neocolonialism within the home where a woman is to be. So you find that the man feels stronger. He feels that he is in charge of the woman's life. And so the woman has to do all the work. There's a community here in Kenya, which is also, it passes across. You'll find the same community in Tanzania. You'll find the same community partly in Uganda, the Maasai community, where the women do everything, including building houses and taking care of the cattle and taking them out to graze, while the men do absolutely nothing. Why? Because they compete so much in paying for the bride price. And while they're paying the bride price, it starts from a childhood, you know. It starts from that slavery. When a child is born, a family puts a price on that girl child. And they say that this girl is going to be married in our community. So they start investing in the girl, and this grows on and on and on. And it brings in that cycle of slavery, where many times they don't really care about how much work the woman has to do. Care work is very, very complicated, and it's getting, it needs to be appreciated. And I think as grassroots women, we need to start teaching each other that it's quite important to just, even when a woman goes out to fetch water, it's a lot of work, because here in Africa, women walk for very many kilometers to look for water. When they come back, they do a lot of many other chores, cooking, fetching firewood, and all this is still not appreciated. When the man goes out to bring monetary money back, they think that the woman is not doing much. So I think it's very important, and I'm really happy that we are bringing these conversations in our spaces. It's very important that we bring it in our spaces and we take it back to the grassroots, and then we open up and find ways. We start looking at the root causes, and how can we start talking about these root causes? How do we start demystifying and naming that master that is making us slaveries in this new time? And there's nothing as bad as being a slave in your own house, where it should be very comfortable. So women are still going through so much simply because of this care work that's not appreciated, neither recognized. Thank you. And I'm so sorry about my network.
Bueno, ahora está Patricia. Después yo voy a interrumpir.
Okay, now we have Patricia, and then I will interrupt the other participants so that I know I can say goodbye. But first, Patricia. Your microphone, Patricia, is still off. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Patricia. I live in Sao Paulo. I'm an activist in the World March here, and my question is for Veronica. I'd like to ask Veronica about the care work tasks. We know that the patriarchy is one of the main causes of the imbalance in care work. And here in Brazil, we have the challenge of the churches, which like to maintain the system in which the women continue to be the main people responsible for the care work. And I'd like to know what it's like in Argentina, bearing in mind the fact that the church laid down some of the main obstacles to abortion. Thank you. Okay, first of all, I'll give the floor to Anoa for a few minutes so that she can say goodbye because she has to leave, and then we'll go back to the others. Okay. I am very thankful to have been able to participate today. I feel very motivated to know that we are not alone talking about the care work system, which extends into many other areas. And it's a worldwide struggle. So we need to unite our strengths and energy. And that's it for now. I have to go to another meeting. I'm so sorry, but I really hope that you have an excellent end to this meeting and see you next time.
Thank you very much, Anoa, for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you with us. Is Josemeiri here? Is Rosemary here? Did you want to speak, Rosemary?
No. Rose, voy a pasar a Jana y después cuando tú estés lista.
I'm going to move on to Jana, and or are you ready now, Rosemary? We can't hear you.
I think Rosemary's voice is muted right now. That's why we cannot hear her.
Sí. Seu microfone está mudo.
Yep, her microphone is switched off.
Alô?
Sim, Rose.
Já? Escutam?
Can you hear me?
Uma boa tarde. Eu sou a Rose Pamplona.
Good evening. I'm Rosemary. I just wanted to come back to this idea of care and religion, because there's been a lot of progress. There's been a lot of progress for women. Sorry, the sound is quite bad.
E a gente ainda ouve falar das companheiras que não tem sobre as religiões afro. Assim, palavras chatas como macumba, como rituais, e eu sempre deparo e vou para cima dizendo que não é isso. São afros e são religiões que devemos respeitar todas, e não é macumba. Outro nome que vocês deveriam estudar mais e que é um pouco sério, nós como mulheres que queremos tanto umas lutas melhores para a gente, lidar com esse tipo de questionamento, né? E que também dentro da religiosidade tenha um cuidado também maior nas escolas, principalmente públicas e municipais, que a gente ainda vê um entrave dessas religiões afro, que para mim são maravilhosas.
I'm sorry, I don't speak Portuguese and the speaker is speaking Portuguese.
Eu participei de conversas pela primeira vez, foi maravilhosa, aprendi muito, e que nós, mulheres, em geral, respeitamos essa religiosidade afro. É só isso que eu tenho a falar. Uma boa tarde.
Gracias. Bueno, ahora, Jana.
Jana?
Yes, thank you so much. I would like to thank all the speakers and the participants for this really, really very interesting discussion. I think that part of our aims in these webinars is also to think about ways to break out the cycle, tools that we can use, feminist strategies, right? And while I was listening to the speakers as well as the commentators, and believe me, everywhere is the same, care work is invisible and unrecognized everywhere. I was thinking that how important it is, I think, to tap into our feminist heritage, let's call it. Each and every one of our cultures have both patriarchal, fascist, racist traits, but it also has feminist, inclusive, and communal forms. So I think it is very important to tap into the part of our heritage which is which has meaning for us and which can help us. And while I was thinking when Lina was speaking, I remembered the idea of aune, if Lina is still here, if you remember it, which is a very old concept used around the Levant, so Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, in which sense people who think that they need help can call for support from their community, whether you're living in a village, whether you're living in a small city. You would call for aune and people would come and help you, whether you're building a house and you don't have enough money or enough people to help you, because generally the whole family, the family itself would build the house. So people would come and help you build the house without asking for money. Or if you need to cook something, or if you need to take care of your children, or if you need to clean the house. So I think also, yes, trying to, understanding how oppressive care work is, it's also important on the other hand to think of how we can use these tools from our heritage and maybe develop them, maybe first of all understand them, know them, discover them, because I'm sure in each of our regions there are some similar kind of feminist heritages that we can use. So it was just an idea that I think it is very important for us to search for tools for us to break out the cycle. Thank you.
Gracias, Yana. Mafalda?
Thank you, Mafalda.
Estoy muteada, estaba muteada.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Sí, escuchamos.
Yes, we can hear you. Well, unfortunately, I arrived late to the meeting, but I'd like to thank the organizers of the webinar. And I think that the last opinions that I heard, I thought they were very necessary to understand that this is a topic and an issue that affects all women across the world. I wanted to tell you that we've just come from a conference on the Chiloé Peninsula, where we talked about care with the sisters that were there and the women on the island of Kemchi. So I think that it's one of the ways that we can socialize, raise awareness of this topic, and draw on the knowledge from all of the other women there so that we can make progress on this issue. This year, that's one of our main focuses for our organization. And the conference was very positive. We heard from all the women in Chiloé who experience different problems and issues, but the issue of care is one of those that affects all of us. So I was very grateful for this conference, and we're progressing along the same path as all of you. So I'll send you all a big hug, and one day our struggle will achieve our goals on this issue. Thank you very much.
Ai, abraço, Mafalda. Saudades. Bueno, por ahora no hay nada inscrito. No sé si alguien quiere pedir la palabra.
So just for now, there's nobody else waiting to speak. I don't know if anybody else wants to speak, or maybe we can come back to Veronica and Lena. I would like to, now that nobody has raised their hands, I'd like to ask my own question. At the World March of Women, we are working on the issue of the care economy and the feminist economy. And we're talking about care as part of this social reproduction from the perspective of change. The organization of care and to leave behind these dichotomies. For us, it's very important to look more in depth at these different dimensions, as well as to analyze our starting point. So what I wanted to hear from Veronica, who didn't have as much time to speak, and Lena too, as Veronica said, as we have been raising this issue on our agenda in our reality in Latin America and in other parts of the world too, it's become an issue that the multilateral organizations and public policy have taken into account. And it's very important for us to reaffirm our position from a perspective of change or rupture. We think that we need to look at how this issue of care is approached. Sometimes it's a very simplistic approach with the regulation of services and domestic work, services for elderly people, and where this more revolutionary element is being overlooked. And we need to question this paradigm of exploitation and domination as part of this model. There's not a single name for capitalist, racialized, racist. etc. So I wanted to know how you perceive these different processes and how our grassroots feminism or systemic feminism can play a role in this debate. I don't know who wants to speak, either Lina or Veronica. Shall we start with Lina and then Veronica? We have 20 minutes before the end of the webinar. So if you want to speak for 10 minutes each, then you have that time.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Nalu. I'll just add, I mean, circling back to what you said, just a few comments. I think the conversation on care, again, particularly in our region, cannot be disconnected from the conversation on various forms of forced migration, including economic migration, including migrant women, and particularly what migrant women, domestic workers. And again, you know, linking this to what Jenna was saying, I think one of the main shifts that we have is the mobilization and organization of migrant workers, of the care workers themselves. Against, you know, I don't think the audience needs to be informed about the exploitative global system that, you know, that brings migrant women workers from one place to another. But I think the important thing is how can, okay, or let me go back and say the challenges. And I think the challenges in our region is perhaps for most quote unquote activists, the incapacity to make the link between all forms of care and all kinds of carers, and care that is paid, that is poorly paid, and care that is unpaid as part of a familial duty. So unless we are clear in making the list and in thinking about it as one and the same issue, and thinking about collective feminist organizing with care workers, you know, I'm not saying, I'm saying that this change is going to be a little bit slow, or basically insignificant. The other thing is, again, you know, the way in which our societies are constructed in such a way that there's a very clear distribution of who does the care and who has to do the care is not by coincidence. And therefore, again, it's a question of thinking about starting, or starting the thinking about where does transformation happen in terms of challenging the ways in which care is defined, care is distributed, and care is basically in a very conscious way made to be invisible, unpaid, or poorly paid. So I think it's mostly, on the one hand, rethinking the whole. Again, I'm talking about the MENA region as a case study, as you know, as a context. Again, it's how do we, you know, expand our analysis? How do we make sure that it's not just about the whole important area of unpaid care work, but also paid care work? And then the third dimension that is incredibly important for the MENA region, how is care amplified as a, on the one hand, as a duty, on the other hand, as a mode of survival within context of recurring conflicts, post-conflict, you know, long-term migration, what happens during these migrations, what happens during armed conflict, etc. So I think it's very, I want to say useless to pick and choose what aspect do you want to tackle, and hence, you know, my kind critique of the ways in which the women's rights movement picked and chose battles. We have to understand the ways in which this whole system works and the ways in which care is at the heart of the social distribution, at the heart of making a particular class particularly and powerful and well-resourced. Thank you.
Gracias, Lina. Bueno, Verónica.
Thank you, Lina. Well, Veronica. Well, thank you very much for your comments and questions. Regarding our sister who asked about the role of the churches, I think that in the comments, Mirta Kennedy gave a very good summary of what this uncertainty about social reproduction means, and that it also enables these new fundamentalisms. And I think that we need to locate two different players here. On the one hand, churches, and on the other, illegal economies, which become providers of resources, of jobs, of money, of loans, and also of certain spiritual help and social prestige. So I think that this is another very important matter, that when we talk about violence in territories, because these two players become fundamental players precisely because they work in the area of social reproduction. So there is an argument that I think is a very direct one regarding the way of being, the way of getting resources, and there are cases of negotiation, cases of cooperation, limited cooperation, and cases of direct conflict and insubordination. So as our sister was saying, I think that this is part of the complexity in the territories of social reproduction, where, let's say, the feminist dynamics are not alone. Rather, they are alongside these players who are also economic and political players and violent players in the different territories, players of various types of violence. And these are also players, it must be said, that offer resources, offer containment, and there is also an argument about their subjectivity, particularly towards young people, the youngest people. So I think that this point is fundamental when we come to analyzing the feminist economy and mapping out the resources, care work, and experiences in the territories. And then regarding what Nalu was saying, I think that this division is fundamental. When we try to capture the language of care and certain resources that we are demanding for care, in Argentina, we use the metaphor of the plaster quite a lot. We try to cover up many different inequalities with the situation of crisis. And in this case, and I think this highlights the distinction that we make of when we talk about care work, we're not talking about international institutions or policies that reinforce gender mandates in the face of precarity. I think this is very important, and I think there are various different warning systems when it comes to feminist work in order to highlight these issues. But now everything is made more difficult in contexts where poverty just continues to grow, when inflation makes daily life increasingly difficult. And our group is carrying out research into the changes that have occurred in the indebtedness of women from the pandemic and onwards, and how debts are linked with the intensity of reproductive work. And because of the way in which they mutually reinforce each other, indebtment and work burden is just incredible. And then there's the other key to our research, which is the financial digitalization, which also adds another complexity to the situation and how digital dynamics colonizes social reproduction. So here, I think we have a great deal of challenges to think about. And as our sisters said, our sisters in the Basque Country, we need to do this analysis, but at the same time, be thinking about different political strategies and initiatives that we can put into action. So we have a great deal of work ahead, but I'm very thankful for this space. Thank you. Thank you very much, Veronica. So I'd like to ask whether Jana or Yildiz would like to make a closing comment.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons that we have chosen the care crisis as one of the important topics as on our way to the international meeting, which is one of the core element in our discussion of feminist alternatives. So it is important for us at the same time to understand this crisis very well, and then to propose alternative ways and to how we can organize the need of care in our communities in the face of this crisis, because it's a matter of life and death. Now our societies turn to be a survival societies, as Veronica indicated, and based on the interview with Silvia Federici, and it's precarity means vulnerability. And also we have seen during the pandemic and also in other experiences based on climate change, earthquakes, typhoons, floods and fires. So we have seen that majority of our societies are disposable. So this, then it comes to when we mention about necropolitics, it means the conflict of capital and life. So in this form of patriarchy, we have been living in its capitalist form, and it is very destructive to human life and also nature through extractivism. So in the experience of earthquakes in Turkey, so we try to understand which one is disaster, earthquake or the government, or the country ruled by conservative neoliberal government. Their policy is just based on privatization of public services that leave the people and our society in a desperate situation in such cases of earthquakes, floods, and forest fires. And we have seen that all public facilities have been privatized. The airplanes to stop forest fire had been already privatized. It's not working. In the case of earthquakes, there was no government and state structure going to the earthquake region to help people. And in this question also, it is important discussion inside our feminist economy proposal is that right to death with dignity is important, right to live in dignity. So we need to ensure people's rights to that with dignity. This is an important element of also feminist economy, and so we need to extend our category of human rights as feminists, because it is today our responsibility, as we discussed in other webinars as well, in this patriarchal, in this capitalist form of patriarchy. The capital is a threat to the life. Therefore, women's liberation means emancipation of all human beings, and also the nature and our territories at the same time. That's why today we have been discussing feminist alternatives and in other ways of organizing care, taking this burden from the shoulder of women, how we can organize and propose more collective ways of covering the needs of society. It is because it is necessary in order to sustain our life, not only human life, but also in general life on the planet. Thank you very much for all these contributions. They are very valuable.
Bueno, hay una compañera que pidió para hablar muy rápido, entonces.
Well, one of our sisters asked to speak, so as we're always trying to make sure everyone can participate, then Maria Fernanda, just 2 minutes because we need to finish.
Thank you.
María Fernanda.
Hi.
Sí,
Do you listen? Hello, darling. Darlings,
Sí,
I'm Maria Fernanda from IFRJ of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and I don't speak other language very well, but I'll try to communicate with you. I will be brief. In the first, I want to emphasize the importance of this intersectional dialogue on a global scale about the care crisis, and to say that her speeches remind me of a sentence by the American activist Angela Davis, who says in her book that thinking about feminism is thinking about projects, and living in a social organization politically mobilized with capitalistic logic, with little regard for women, is very difficult, makes the sentence even stronger. We're speaking about quality of life, survival. The lack of access to care is violent. Over time, since the beginning of the world, women have had to assume responsibility for care without being truly cared for. And even today, we women cannot access some essential support that would guarantee care, and mainly through misogynist reproduction that make it impossible to pay for a dignified routine. Many privatization. Do you listen? Do you listen?
Yes.
Sí.
Thank you. So that we can talk more about these topics that positive move our lives. Care. Thank you.
Gracias, María Fernanda. Bueno, agradecer otra vez a todas, a Verónica.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Veronica, Lina, Ainhoa, and Jana, who worked so hard to organize this webinar, and all our sisters from the International Secretariat. Thank you, Yildiz.
Una clausura muy
for your very appropriate closing contribution that really conveyed what we at the World March of Women are trying to do. And you really highlighted the key points in our debates and our struggle at the moment. We are identifying these links, and we're continue to struggle and to examine our alliance and to build our alliances. Thank you very much to everybody, everyone who has participated, all the speakers, the interpreters. And next month, we'll be back with another webinar. And we hope that you can all join us next time so we can continue to build on this debate. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, Nalu. Muchas gracias, Nalu.
Thank you so much, Nalu. Adiós. Good today, man. Very good.
Un abrazo para todas. Chao.
Chao, Mafalda.
Chao.
The march to freedom goes beyond every season. The reason our intention to fulfill this destiny. It's not fiction, because it's stronger than addiction. It's not oblivion. See how this is worth marching for. This universal ambition is for the emancipation of the woman.